New information that the 33-year-old social media model was strangled to death. That's according to the Fort Bend County Medical Examiner's Office, and police are also now trying to figure out a timeline of when this all may have happened, and also shared with us that they have not seen any signs of forced entry.
At 3:14 in the afternoon, the sun hung hot over Richmond, Texas. The streets were quiet, the air heavy. Mark Gear pulled up outside his daughter's apartment. Her black BMW sat in its usual spot, gleaming in the light. But the stillness around it made his stomach twist. He called her phone again. No answer. He had tried before, over and over, and every time the call went to voicemail. This was not like her. He walked to the front door. It was locked. He knocked, once, twice, harder. Nothing. The silence on the other side pressed in on him. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. In a rush of fear, he kicked the door open. Inside, the air was heavy and stale. The light from outside barely touched the shadows in the room. His eyes swept the space, searching, until they landed on the staircase. At the bottom lay his daughter, Mercedes Moore, her body still, her face frozen in a way no father should ever see. She was only 33. A bright, famous figure to the world, but to him, still his little girl. The sight locked his breath in his chest. His gaze lifted, and upstairs he saw a man, someone he had never seen before, collapsed on the floor. Blood spilled from a wound in the man's neck. It pulsed weakly, then slowed. The man twitched, gasped, and lay still. The walls around them told their own story. Blood streaked across them in dark, ugly smears. And on the pale paint, in uneven red letters drawn with lipstick, were words that chilled the room: "I should have stayed in Florida." Another wall read, "I wish I never loved her." And above the mirror, a final message: "I'm sorry." It was a scene so twisted, so cruel, that it would burn itself into Mark's memory for the rest of his life. Mercedes Moore was born Janae Gagnier, a young woman whose beauty and style drew millions of eyes to her online world. On Instagram, more than 2.6 million people followed her life. Her feed was filled with bright smiles, luxury fashion, and snapshots with music stars like Drake, Travis Scott, and Offset. To her fans, she was a rising star, moving quickly through the glittering world of fame. But on August 29, 2021, all of that ended. She was found dead inside her own apartment in Richmond, Texas. The man responsible was 34-year-old Kevin Alexander Acorto. He had traveled almost 1,000 miles from Florida to reach her. Mercedes had never spoken to him. She had never met him. To her, he was a stranger. There was no broken glass, no damaged locks, no sign of a robbery. Nothing was missing. What was left behind was far darker. This was not about theft. It was not about chance. It was about one thing, an obsession that had grown in the shadows until it became deadly. Janae grew up in Houston, Texas, in a close military family where discipline and care went hand in hand. Her father carried himself with the steady calm of a quiet protector. Her mother moved through life with purpose, guiding her children with love and determination. Much of Janae's childhood was spent helping in the family's restaurant, where she learned early the weight and worth of hard work. By the age of 12, she was already finding her own ways to earn. In the small space of her garage, she braided hair for neighbors and friends, her hands quick and skilled. Life was not without its troubles. Her parents' divorce brought changes that shifted her between homes in Texas and California. New schools, new cities, and the challenge of starting over became part of her growing years. But she never stopped moving forward. After high school, she tried college, aiming to become a dental assistant, but her path soon turned. She moved to Las Vegas with her boyfriend at the time and began to reshape her identity. In time, she stepped onto a new stage, calling herself Mercedes Moore. She worked as a dancer, then built herself into a model, and eventually became a recognized influencer. Her Instagram became a gallery of shining moments, luxury clothes, flawless beauty, and glimpses of the nightlife that sparkled with promise. Yet, behind all the brightness, she stayed deeply tied to home. She sent money to her family, spoke to her parents every day, and carried dreams of starting her own brand, one that would let her success grow far beyond the screen. The gated apartment complex where Mercedes lived was meant to be her safe place. She had chosen it for the tall fences, the guardhouse, and the feeling that trouble could not follow her there. It was her retreat after years of uneasy encounters. Strangers finding out too much, unwanted gifts arriving too close to home, shadows that lingered in the back of her mind. Inside those gates, she believed she could breathe. But on that heavy August Sunday, the Texas air felt thicker than usual. The sun blazed against the quiet streets, but for Mercedes's family, there was only a growing coldness. She had not posted on social media for 3 days. To most people, that might seem small, but for her, it was like falling silent in the middle of a song. She was known for her constant connection to her followers, a quick selfie, a glimpse of her day, a short note to her fans. It was her routine. Breaking that rhythm meant something was wrong. Her sister, London, was the first to speak her fear aloud. She called their father, her voice carrying the unease she could not shake. Janae's phone was off. Texts went unanswered. She had said nothing about going anywhere, and no one had heard from her. Mark had just returned from a fishing trip. The moment London's words hit his ear, the world seemed to tilt. He knew his daughter. She was not careless with family. She would not vanish without a word. Without stopping to think, he got into his car and drove to her place at the Cortlandt Apartments in Richmond. The gates opened, and his eyes landed on her black BMW, parked as if she might walk out any second. But the building itself stood too still. The air around it felt wrong, like the pause before a storm. He knocked on her door. Waited. Knocked again, harder. Nothing. The sound of his own heartbeat was louder than the quiet pressing against him from inside. He called her phone again, even though he already knew she wouldn't pick up. The door was locked. His gut told him the truth before his mind could catch up. In one swift, desperate motion, he kicked the door open. The smell hit him first. Stale air, heavy and unmoving. The light spilling through the windows felt weak against the shadows clinging to the walls. He stepped inside, and his eyes swept over the room. Then they froze. At the bottom of the staircase lay his daughter. Mercedes. Still. Unmoving. The world narrowed to that one sight. For a split second, his mind tried to cling to hope. Maybe she had fallen. Maybe she was hurt but breathing. He took a step closer. The chaos around her began to come into focus. Blood splattered on the walls, furniture shoved out of place, objects strewn where they didn't belong. This was no accident. This was violence. And then he saw the words. Written in a jagged, uneven hand, smeared with red lipstick, "I should have stayed in Florida. I wish I never loved her." Above the mirror, a final message bled into the glass, "I'm sorry." The air in the apartment felt colder now. Upstairs, a sound broke the silence, a faint, wet gasp. Mark climbed the steps, each one heavier than the last, until he reached the bedroom. There, sprawled on the floor, was a man he had never seen before. Blood poured from a deep cut in his neck, pooling dark beneath him. His breath rattled, shallow and fading. Mark could only stand frozen as the man's body twitched once, then stilled forever. The truth settled like stone in his chest. His daughter had been murdered. The medical examiner would later confirm it. She had been strangled and struck in the head. She had fought. She had fought with everything she had, but she had been overpowered. And in her final moments, in the place she thought was safest, the life she had worked so hard to build was taken from her. Mark would carry the weight of that day for the rest of his life, the smell, the silence, the words on the walls, and the image of his baby girl lying at the bottom of the stairs, forever out of his reach. The investigation began with questions that seemed to have no easy answers. The door was intact. The locks were unbroken. There was no shattered glass, no splintered wood, no sign of a struggle at the entrance. It was as if the man had simply appeared inside. Detectives walked the quiet halls of the complex, retracing the path a stranger might have taken. Did he follow another resident through the gates, blending into the flow of the day? Did he wait in the shadows until she returned home, slipping in before the door could close? Or had he somehow convinced her to open it herself? Outside, the August heat pressed down. Inside, the room still carried the cold echo of what had happened. Every footprint, every smear, every overturned object was examined, but the entrance remained a mystery. When news of her death reached the outside world, it spread like fire through social media. The name Mercedes Moore filled timelines and headlines. But with the flood of attention came a tide of rumor and cruelty. Some said she had been killed by a jealous lover. Others claimed it was revenge. A few insisted it was COVID-19. In the harsh glare of online chatter, people twisted her death into their own stories. The truth was far stranger, and far more chilling. The man upstairs, 34-year-old Kevin Alexander Accordo, was not an ex-boyfriend. He was not a business partner. He was not even a passing acquaintance. He had never been in her life in any real way. But he had been watching her. For years, Kevin had followed her online, a ghostly presence behind the screen. To Mercedes, he was just another follower among millions, a name she didn't know, a face she had never seen. But to him, she was more than a person, she was a fixation, a fantasy he carried until it swallowed everything else. And one day, he left Florida and drove nearly 1,000 miles to make that fantasy real. Detectives turned their focus to the things Kevin had left behind. His phone, his laptop, the traces of his life online, every detail was studied. What they found painted the picture of a mind sinking deeper into darkness. His devices held folders of bookmarked photos of Mercedes, carefully saved over time. There were months of her images, taken from her public pages, stored like treasures. Investigators found long trails of online activity, scrolling through her posts, watching her videos, leaving messages she never answered. The silence from her side had not stopped him. It had only made his obsession grow. The search revealed no sudden explosion of interest. This had been building slowly, quietly, until it became something dangerous. Kevin had left Florida in a rented car, carrying his fixation across nearly 1,000 miles without telling anyone where he was going. There were no goodbye calls, no explanations. Only a one-way trip toward a woman who had no idea he existed. Detectives believe he found a way into her apartment and stayed there for up to 2 days before the final attack. In that time, he ate food from her kitchen. He slept in her bed. He moved through her space as if it were his own, leaving those jagged words on the walls, written in red lipstick. They were not the quick scrawls of a man in panic, they were deliberate, placed where they could not be missed. There was no sign of sexual assault. This was not about desire. It was about control, about ownership, about an obsession that had crossed the thin line between fantasy and reality. In the end, it spiraled into the kind of violence that leaves nothing behind but shock, grief, and the question of why. There would be no arrest, no day in court, no moment where Mercedes's family could face the man who had taken her life. Kevin's suicide ended the legal process before it could even begin. On paper, the case was closed, a murder-suicide with a single suspect, now dead. But for those who loved her, nothing was closed. The wound remained wide open. In the days that followed, grief wrapped itself around her family like a weight they could not lift. Her father, Mark, spoke to reporters with a voice that carried both strength and breaking sorrow. The world knew her as Mercedes Moore, the glamorous figure who lit up screens with her beauty and style. But to him, she was still Janae, his baby girl, the child he had held in his arms, the teenager who had called him for advice, the young woman he had tried to protect in every way he knew how. Every word he spoke carried the truth that fame had never defined her at home. She had been kind. She had cared for her family. She had worked hard for everything she had. And in the end, none of it had been enough to keep her safe from a stranger's obsession. The cameras eventually moved on. The headlines faded. But for her family, the emptiness stayed, marking every day that came after. There would be no justice served in a courtroom. No verdict to say her life had mattered in the eyes of the law. All they had left was memory, loss, and the cruel knowledge that the man responsible had escaped any reckoning by taking his own life. News of Mercedes's death spread quickly, rippling through the influencer world and far beyond. Shock turned to mourning as tributes poured in from fans, friends, and strangers who had followed her journey online. Her Instagram, once filled with bright images and lively comments, became a wall of grief. Celebrities who had once stood beside her in photographs shared their own heartbreak. Among them was Drake, who quietly honored her in the liner notes of his Certified Lover Boy album, a small gesture that carried a deep weight for those who knew how much she had admired his music. Others in the entertainment world posted messages, sharing memories and calling her loss a tragedy that should never have happened. But the grief did more than fill timelines. It sparked conversations that had long been avoided. People began to speak openly about the hidden dangers of online fame, the way millions can see your life with just a click, and how that visibility can also invite those with darker intentions. Her murder became a case study in how easily a stranger could cross the fragile line between the digital world and real life. Advocacy groups stepped forward, using her story as a rallying cry. They called for stronger laws against cyberstalking, for better systems to help people report threats before they escalate, and for new tools to protect those whose work requires them to live in the public eye. Many spoke about how women, in particular, often carry the weight of this danger in silence, forced to navigate between sharing their work and safeguarding their lives. Mercedes's name became more than a headline, it became a warning, a reminder that behind every post, every smile, and every moment of online success, there is a person who deserves to be safe. Mercedes's story is not just another case to be filed away. It is a warning that should echo far beyond the walls of her apartment. She had taken every step she knew to protect herself. She chose a gated community with locked entrances. She avoided sharing too many personal details online. She stayed alert. Yet even with all of that, the danger still found its way in. In today's world, the reach of the internet can feel like a gift, a way to connect, to grow, to share. But that same reach can turn into something sharp and unseen, cutting through the barriers we think will protect us. With a single click, a stranger can know our faces, our routines, the corners of our lives we never meant to reveal. What happened to Mercedes could happen to anyone who lives in the open space of the digital world. It leaves a question that is hard to shake. How safe are we, really, when the eyes on us are not always friendly, when someone can watch from behind a screen and decide to step into our lives without permission? Her death is a loss that should not be forgotten. It should not fade into silence. Every story like hers holds the power to remind us that caution alone is not enough. We need stronger protections, sharper awareness, and the will to act before obsession turns deadly. And so, her name should be spoken, her life remembered, and her warning heard. Even the brightest lights can be chased by shadows.